Welcome. This is a special event. I'm Debbie Johnson, and I'm the Colorado lead for this event. I went to the national conference in February, and I haven't been the same since. I have a lot of hope. And so if you can join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance, please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So now I'd like to introduce Brittany Martinez. She's the Executive Director of Principles First.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, first of all, to all of our wonderful volunteers who helped us put this together. Principles First is run on 99.999% volunteer power, and I'm the one staffer. So things like this are not possible without them, so if you could quickly join me in giving them a round of applause, I'd really appreciate it. So yes, I am not Heath Mayo, our founder, who's normally the one sort of giving these initial remarks. My name is Brittany Martinez. I'm executive director. And unfortunately, he's fine, but he did get stuck in Hawaii, given all of the storms and tsunami stuff going on. He is okay. And unfortunately for you, that means you're stuck with me as your moderator for the evening. But I hope to make this as painless as possible. And very quickly about Principles First, before I introduce Governor Polis, is we started in 2019 as counter-programming to CPAC and the extreme nature of what we felt was that. And I think a lot of people in this room, whether you identify yourself as a Republican like me, maybe a disgruntled former Republican, maybe you're a moderate Dem, maybe you're even a little bit on the left, that's okay. I think the things that we care about at Principles First is rule of law, Constitution, and making sure that our elected leaders are protecting those things that they've sworn to defend. So without further ado, we are honored to welcome Governor Jared Polis, a principled leader who has consistently worked to champion freedom, innovation, and the rights of all Coloradans. Under his leadership, Colorado has made great strides in ensuring that democratic principles remain at the forefront of policymaking. Governor Polis's dedication to creating a government that is transparent, accountable, and focused on the common good aligns deeply with the values we stand for at Principles First. And today we are fortunate to hear from him. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Governor Polis.
Give my regards to Heath as well. And Debbie, were you in Washington, D.C. when I addressed Principles First there? So I got to participate, 7 months ago, in the national conference in Washington, D.C., and it was amazing to see. There must have been thousands. There were thousands of people there, several thousand, really hungry for a values and principle-driven voice in politics. And I think that the timing is absolutely right. And I couldn't be more thrilled that this is, I understand, your third event in Colorado, which is wonderful, growing. First big event here in the state of many more, because I think that people, just as people across the country are hungry for really restoring, in many ways, rationality, principles, rule of law, first and foremost in politics, certainly the people of Colorado are. And I think we all see the unsettling shift nationally, a radical shift away from individual freedom and rule of law, from fundamental values that Principles First supports, like integrity and character, the dignity and self-worth of every individual. Sadly, a shift away from that. We and you have an important role to play in that pendulum swinging back and bringing that back into balance to support these basic values. Furthermore, and of course this happens with both parties, and I think that's one of the reasons that it's important to say principles first. It's a great way to describe it. Generally, some people in both parties put party first. And it takes one person in one party, president, could be President Biden, could be President Trump, they say something, automatically the other party is against it. Tariffs are a great example. I'm for free trade, and traditionally many Republicans have been for free trade. But guess what? The current president is for the highest tariffs ever. I'm pleased that suddenly the Democrats are for free trade. That's great news. I'm more at home there now. But again, for many of them on both sides, and especially, again, Republicans who used to be for trade and now are not, Democrats, it was not about the principles. For me, it was about economics in that case, the economic benefit. For those of you who are students of economics, David Ricardo, his work, I mean, sort of the demonstrated benefit of free trade to our economy, to people, to wealth building, to prosperity. For others, it's about pandering in politics on any side. And that's just one example of so many, where I think it's important to bring it back to why we believe what we believe and how we can advocate that through our small d democratic political process. How we can, of course, strengthen our civic institutions. I was proud to, as chair and vice chair of the National Governors Association, I focused on education, but the year before worked with Spencer Cox on Disagree Better was our initiative. How can we find ways to disagree in more meaningful and constructive ways? Again, driven by the merits, driven by the policy. Very often you'll find out the principles are the same. And again, we got to go through. There's 15 principles. How many of you have read through all the 15 principles? Okay, well, I'll go through them quickly since you all haven't. But my main feedback to Heath, and I'll give it to you guys as well, is there's too many from a marketing perspective. You got to cut it down to 3 or 4. Nobody has patience for 15. But they are all very good. Integrity, character, and virtue matter. Every person has dignity, quality, and worth. Truth, honesty, rationality, and facts are non-negotiable. The Constitution and the rule of law are paramount. Again, that's above and beyond any political. I mean, who cares? You're for this tax, against this tax, for this tariff, against this tariff. We all have our positions. But the rule of law is paramount. That's that secret sauce that makes America great, and we cannot sacrifice that for any policy priorities of the right or the left. Our government is a limited one with enumerated powers. That's the basic principle of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, right? Congress writes laws, the executive executes laws, the courts interpret laws. That's we all probably learned in high school that was a given. These days we can't take that as a given. We have, of course, an executive who's seeking to write and interpret the laws. Hopefully he won't succeed in that. But as an executive, I take my role to execute the law very seriously. I have a role in the lawmaking process. I can veto or sign a bill, and I veto some of them. But once a law is made, I am deeply committed to implement it to the best of my ability. Government closest to the people is most accountable. People reach their full potential when they are free. Free and functioning markets deliver prosperity, equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. Government must responsibly steward resources for the next generation. Civic associations, faith communities, and families should be the primary engines of our culture, not the state. And again, that goes for both sides, right? I mean, it's not for the state to be woke or anti-woke. That's not, we're just the custodians of the public trust for governing this common enterprise to make it's up to culture to evolve however it does and free individuals in our society to choose how they want to live their lives. Strong families are the building blocks of society. Sovereignty is critical to self-government, and America's role in the world is unique and important. Now, sadly, these principles aren't necessarily reflected in the platforms of any party. And I want to go beyond the Democrats and Republicans. It's certainly not reflected in the platforms of the Libertarians or the Greens, or I don't even know what other parties are out there. But these are, well, many Americans hold these principles dear, and they're neither right nor left. They're really, I think, very much speak to the American experience. They're not necessarily reflected very often in the body politic these days by members of either party. Again, from a marketing perspective, I think you should get it down to 3 or 4, but certainly this is comprehensive and thoughtful and doesn't speak to just one side, right? And there's kind of, there's very much dog whistles to both sides, right? Integrity, character, and virtue matter, right? They really do. And when we say everybody has dignity, quality, and worth, you know, that speaks to everybody, right? Doesn't matter whether you're a conservative Christian, whether you're gay, whether you're a first-generation immigrant, whether your family's been here, Native American for thousands of years. Everybody deserves dignity and respect in this great country of ours. So in many ways, that's what Principles First is all about. I am excited to that you have a Colorado chapter, hopefully a growing one. And it's really up to all of you to tell your friends and neighbors about this important work, in many ways to restore politics to its core of really manifesting our values in our communities, right? Collectively through our vote, through our voices. We deserve better. We deserve better at all levels. And it's not enough just to say we deserve better. It's important to take actions to transform and be that change. And it's sometimes hard because there are people on different sides that are extremely passionate about that, their one narrow thing on that side. But we should show that equal passion for these values and principles that we hold dear. If at the end of the day, what can you be more passionate about than protecting our freedom, our independence, and the rule of law? In many ways, that's what our forefathers, in many cases, gave their lives for. And countless other sins from World War II to Vietnam to the Gulf Wars have paid the ultimate sacrifice in defending those freedoms. So let us never, for one moment, take those for granted. So I hope that this gathering is really just a beginning for many of you to be involved, of course, with Principles First, but also with other community organizations, with candidates, with parties, with civic advocacy organizations across the board to help show that our values do matter and that we don't only say we deserve better, but we're taking actions to help transform that into reality. So thank you all very much. Please give my regards to Heath, and I'll turn it back over.
Good evening again. We're getting ready to start the second panel. I'm Melissa Milhorn. I am the events chair for Principles First, and it is my privilege to introduce the panel with Brittany and Judge Michael Luttig, a respected former judge from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. He is known for unwavering commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law. Judge Luttig has been a guiding voice on critical legal matters affecting our democracy. His leadership and legal insights have shaped the national conversation on the importance of upholding our foundational freedoms. We are honored to hear his perspective today on the First Amendment and the role of institutions in preserving our rights. Please join me in welcoming Judge Luttig.
Well, hello, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I already mentioned to you that Heath unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, and so when I knew I'd have to moderate a discussion with Judge, I was like, oh no, I hope he doesn't not show up because it's me and I'm not as important. But he's so gracious, and of course he was going to come. So we are huge fans of you. So thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you, Brittany, and don't tell Heath I said this, but. I'm glad that you're here instead of he.
I'll take it.
But I really came to hear John Daly, and I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait to hear him. But thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. And when I say that, after these 4 years, you know how much I mean it. I literally could not have done what I have done if it were not for people just like you, and even you in particular. So close have I've been and felt to Principles First. I only found out, at the last second before I spoke at a Principles First conference that that Heath and I went to school together. And I see some of you laughing, but that's true. We weren't classmates, but we did actually go to the same school and grew up in the same town of Tyler, Texas. And I learned that when I first went to speak at Principles First, and met his mother. And his mother said, "Judge, do you know where Heath is from?" I said, "Well, no, ma'am." I said, "I don't even know who you are." And she said, "Well, I'm Heath's mother, and we live in Tyler, Texas." And I left Tyler in 72 to go to college in Virginia and have never come back. The next thing I wanted to do before, actually, you'll be the first person that's ever asked me questions. I mean, judges ask the questions. You don't get to ask questions of the judges.
I feel honored.
But in any event, do you like all this? I bought this just for you. About 15 minutes ago. So I arrived here about 40 minutes ago. And as I was pulling in, my wife of 45 years called. So all of you men and women know exactly how these words were said. She said, oh, where are you? And I said, just pulled in, perfect, no traffic, no nothing. And she said, fantastic. She said, what are you wearing? And I said, I've got on my PE shorts and a T-shirt and my tennis shoes, and I'm going to run in and change clothes. And she said, well, that'll be interesting. And I said, why would that be interesting? And she said, because you left them here at the house in Vail. And this was 45 minutes ago. And she said, well, I will text you the local address of Joseph Banks, and they are open and waiting for you. So I left, went to Joseph Banks, and walked in here 10 minutes ago with all these new threads. Okay, Brittany.
Okay, are we ready? No, you look wonderful. You look wonderful. So, Judge, let's start with something timely that you've been very vocal about recently, and that is federal court nominees. What's on your mind these days?
Wow, what's on my mind these days? Let me just start at the top. The Atlantic asked me to write a piece for the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency, and I was honored to do it. And I wrote one of the longest pieces that's been written in the Atlantic for a while, and I titled it at the end of the rule of law in America. And I documented that because I knew that was sensational. But I analyzed in that piece every one of the president's signature initiatives in the first 100 days, beginning with his two greatest signature initiatives, which was the deportations and tariffs. And then I went down through everything else. At the highest level, for instance, his executive order that would repeal the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, all the way down to his literally corrupt executive orders against the nation's law firms, and then his especially corrupt executive orders against individual American citizens, some of whom had actually worked for him in his first administration, who did nothing other than disagree with Donald Trump on whether he won or lost the 2020 presidential election. For those people, those executive orders, the President of the United States of America threw the entire weight of the United States government against these not just innocent citizens, but honorable citizens. And as you know, he has stood behind those executive orders to this day. And back at the time, he kept issuing them one right after the other, right after the other. Now, just like for every single one, every single one of those initiatives that I analyzed. And you can just accept my word, it's his entire administration so far. Every single one of those initiatives has been stopped in its tracks by the federal courts, okay? Every single one of them. Most of them were unconstitutional per se. It wasn't even a question. Not even a question. And then, as you know, he's defied the federal court orders. Almost every one of the lower court federal court orders defied them. But he's also defied the orders of the Supreme Court of the United States, specifically in the Abrigo Garcia case. Biggest deal in his administration, goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court orders Donald Trump to facilitate Abrigo Garcia's return to the United States of America immediately. Days later, Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office with the dictator from El Salvador, and the two of them announced to the Supreme Court of the United States, Abrigo Garcia will never come back to this country. Okay? That's the big picture. Fast forward to last week to answer Brittany's question. Donald Trump, as you know, nominated Emile Beauvais to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals of America, to a lifetime appointment. What was his credential for that? He was Donald Trump's henchman, personal lawyer, and then henchman from the Department of Justice of the United States of America. He was the person who was firing all of the Department of Justice lawyers for working on the criminal case against Donald Trump for attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. He spearheaded the firings of every official that Donald Trump has wanted fired for simply doing their job, right? Leading up to the crescendo that multiple whistleblowers told the Senate of the United States of America before they voted, chapter and verse, by date, by time, the many times where this man, who is now a United States judge, said to groups of people within the Department of Justice, F the courts. We're going to do whatever we want. Our Republican Senate confirmed him unanimously. It's a disgrace to America. U.S. attorneys, your next question. That when I told you this would be easy.
I was so nervous.
Relax. U.S. attorneys. So if a U.S. attorney has been appointed temporarily, and that temporary appointment expires after whatever the statutory time period it is, the court in which it sits actually gets to decide whether to retain that U.S. attorney. 3 times that's happened since Donald Trump took office again. And twice, if not 3 times, the federal judges of the United States said, no way will we allow this person to be a United States attorney. Now get a load of this. And if this doesn't make your head spin, nothing will. In their latest corruption of the federal courts and the rule of law, the United States Department of Justice, stay with me, because when I got the call, I didn't even believe it. The person who called me said, Judge, it was New York Times, Judge, are you familiar with the lawsuit by the Attorney General of the United States and the Department of Justice against the entire federal court in Maryland? And I said, well, no, but I don't even understand what you're saying. What you said was that the Attorney General had filed a lawsuit against the entire federal court. I said, well, first thing I said, that's not even possible. I mean, that's the United States of America suing the United States of America. And this reporter said, well, here's what happened. Well, it turns out that, the Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice, sued the entire federal court in Maryland over a standing order that the court had entered in response to Donald Trump's refusal to obey the court orders and deport persons from this country before they had an opportunity even to file their habeas corpus petition in contravention of the Supreme Court's order. So stay with me. The Department of Justice of the United States filed a lawsuit against the entire federal court seeking to invalidate that order because they said it was groundless and baseless, because there was no reason at all to think that Donald Trump's administration would deport people without giving them their opportunity to file their habeas corpus petition. Laughable. Most recently, what is this, Friday, this week, and I'm sure you've read about it, Pam Bondi, I will say only that there's never been an Attorney General of the United States like her. And God help us if there's ever another person. The woman knows nothing about the law, nothing. The only thing she knows is what Donald Trump tells her to do. So, this week, as you probably read, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, filed a misconduct complaint against Judge Goldberg of the Federal District Court of the District of Columbia. Remember Judge Goldberg. He was the first federal judge who was assigned the case of Abrigo Garcia's deportation. You will probably remember at the time when he issued his first order in the case, which, as I recall, was like, I'm going to give the parties 48 hours to brief this case. The President of the United States of America called for his impeachment. For his impeachment. And of course, the Republican congressman immediately introduced articles of impeachment because Judge Goldberg had issued, a scheduling order that would have prevented Donald Trump from deporting this man instantly from the United States. Remember, this is the judge who entered an order literally after the planes had left, deporting these Salvadorans. And it's caused the big brouhaha, but it's been determined, and now pending is Judge Boasberg's contempt finding against Donald Trump. But he ordered the planes returned. And of course, Donald Trump said no. And those people were delivered to the gulag in El Salvador. So what I said in that Atlantic article months and months ago, of course for the first time, and when I say something like this, I tie it down to a fare thee well, because I know I'm going to live with that for years. I said, in his first day back in the Oval Office, Donald Trump declared war on the federal judiciary and on the rule of law in America. I said to a New York Times reporter yesterday morning, she said, well, so Judge, you were prophetic. And I said, no, I wasn't prophetic at all. I said, that's what he was doing at the time, but you can quote me on this. I could never have imagined where he would have gone and has gone from that first day to this 200th day in office. And it's crystal clear from this past week that he's just beginning. He is savaging the federal judiciary as a whole, and as you know, by individual judge. Despicable. And every time he does it, these judges are threatened with their lives, and so are their family members. And these judges have to get protection 24/7, and they have to pay for it. Related to this, the Judicial Conference of the United States of America, that represents the entire federal judiciary, has now met a few months ago to decide whether the United States Marshal Service can be trusted to protect the judges of the United States, because the Marshal Service is under Pam Bondi's direction. So that's where we are today, and we have 3.5 years to go. There's no one now who could stop him or who wants to stop him. And that includes, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States.
Well, you just mentioned dissenting voices. And I think it's not just critics, it's people who just disagree with Trump, that he'll say, and MAGA supporters will say, we're going to primary you, we're going to put a bunch of money against someone to run against you. And he's also going after our higher institutions, our schools, the judiciary, as you mentioned. What advice would you give to people like us in this room who are watching and don't know what to do? What can we do?
I'm asked that every day. And there is nothing that can be done now by all of us. There's nothing I can do anymore. The die's cast. It was cast in whatever, 7 months, 8 months. The Congress of the United States, absolutely supine. It will approve anything and everything that Donald Trump tells them to. That's one check and balance in our constitutional republic. There's only one other, the Supreme Court of the United States. Well, Supreme Court of the United States should have thought of that last year when it gave Donald Trump absolute immunity from any criminal offense that he would ever commit against the United States of America. There was not one shred of evidence, one authority, one single word in American history and the founding of this nation for 250 years, not one word, and every single word contrary to that decision by the Supreme Court. It was one of the greatest honors of my life to head the Office of Legal Counsel. That is the office, that is the person who is singly responsible for law and the constitutional law for the executive branch of the government. By design, that office leans toward executive power. Every word that's ever been written from that office either said or assumed that the President of the United States of America would, of course, be responsible for any criminal offense he committed against America. The day that decision came out, of course, when I asked to go on television everywhere, and I forget where I went, but I said that this is the most abominable decision in the history of the Supreme Court of the United States, and that includes Dred Scott, and three other decisions. When asked to explain it, I explained it this way. I said, Dred Scott, cases like that, the Japanese internment case, they did not destroy the structural Constitution. This decision destroyed the structure of our Constitution and of our government by imbalancing the powers. We only have now one government official in the United States of America. At the moment, we don't have a Congress. It remains to be seen whether we have a Supreme Court. And in saying that, I'm not saying anything that everybody else isn't saying, right? In the most recent thing, I styled the piece, "Where is the Supreme Court?" And in that piece, I was addressing Bondi's misconduct complaint against Judge Goldberg. The Supreme Court is I have to choose my words very carefully, of course. And the words that I used in that piece were that the Supreme Court is acquiescing in, if it is not approving every bit of this. What's the support for that? For the first time in American history, as you've read, the biggest scandal at the Supreme Court of the United States is that the Supreme Court is deciding case after case after case after case of the greatest importance in all of constitutional history without briefing, without argument, and without written opinion. The country is erupting over this, as it should. What is the Supreme Court doing? I got no earthly idea, but I know this. This has to stop. The only power the Supreme Court has in this country is the power of its reasoning. And the day that it refuses to reason to its conclusions on behalf of the American people, it's not even a Supreme Court. The less important, but big deal, the lower federal courts. The Supreme Court is issuing these opinions literally, friends, without one single word of explanation. Not one. And sending these biggest of constitutional issues back to the lower courts. I was a judge for 15 years. Somebody better pray that I'm not a judge now. If the Supreme Court sent me that, you know what, back, they'd hear from me. And they're beginning to hear from the federal judges who are sitting today. Like, what on earth are you do? What do you want us to do with this? This is your job. We do what you tell us to do. Tell us what to do. Don't send us this one sentence order that says reversed. So, at the moment, this country is in deep, deep trouble. Come out of it just because of the argument was today, and a friend of mine argued it. One of the first things I dealt with in that Atlantic article was the tariffs. And I said, look, Donald Trump's tariffs, unilateral imposition of tariffs, and his withdrawing of them, adding to, it's a complete circus, right? It's thrown the world into turmoil. Well, those are unconstitutional. Under the Constitution of the United States, there's nothing clearer than that the Congress of the United States imposes tariffs. Now, by statute, Congress has given the president very, very narrow authority in very, very narrow circumstances to impose very narrow tariffs for a very short period of time. So what did our President of the United States do on the first day in office? He declared a national emergency. And he has now argued, and is arguing, and had to argue again today, that yes, we have a national economic emergency that required that I act to impose tariffs on the world. Well, like I said, my friend argued it today in the federal, trade court, federal court of appeals, and the argument's ludicrous. In judicial terms, it's frivolous. the Supreme Court of the United States is letting all of these cases go for what will be years. And Donald Trump will have destroyed America by the time the Supreme Court ever decides these cases. And guess what? When it finally gets to the Supreme Court, you know what the Supreme Court's going to say? Oh, well, gosh, this is moot. I told my friend, it's not too confidential, I told him after your argument, I said, listen, Neil, it's Neil Katyal, one of the greatest Supreme Court advocates of all time. And I said, Neil, Supreme Court will never hear this case. And he said, you mean they're going to deny cert from the decision that comes out of the Federal Circuit? I said, no. It'll be moot. And he was silent. He said, what are you even talking about? I said, mark my words.
Audience questions?
Yes, sir.
Why? You have this absurd decision last year where the Supreme Court says the executive branch is above the law. Okay, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it seemed to me it like overthrew Magna Carta. Okay, and
At least.
Okay, why? I mean, Roberts wasn't appointed by Trump. Well, most of these people weren't. I mean, where did this come from? Why are they acting in this bizarre way? It impressed me as absurd that you had the Supreme Court, I mean, undermining its own power to empower a demagogue.
So I'm going to give you the analysis, and then I'm going to give you what I believe is the only possible conclusion. And it's the only possible conclusion from the compelling analysis that I'm about to give you. I already gave you the most fundamental one, which is there was not one word in all of American constitutional history for the decision, not one. And they didn't find one either. But listen to this. This gets into the weeds, but it doesn't get into the weeds. Every school kid knows that the Supreme Court just decides cases. Okay? We adults know that what that means. The Supreme Court only decides the narrowest issue possible ever. What was the issue presented to this Supreme Court? Can Donald Trump be prosecuted for attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election? Pristine clear. Supreme Court, in its argument, never even discussed that issue. Never even discussed it. When both counsel attempted to bring the court back to the only issue before it, two different justices said, well, I'm not interested in that. One of the justices said, well, counsel, we're writing for the ages here. No person should ever have the honor of being a federal judge in the United States of America who would say ever, I'm writing for the ages. Think about that. We don't want nobody writing for the ages because we, the American people, don't trust them. Back to the main point. What did the court decide? How did it decide that? it is not possible under the Constitution for there to be a narrower and clearer issue for decision. So what did the Supreme Court decide? First, it didn't decide that issue at all. No. What did it decide? That the President of the United States has absolute immunity from a criminal prosecution for any conceivable act, not just attempting to overturn an election, you get it? Anything at all in the exercise of his powers as president, even arguable exercise of his powers. There is no other conclusion. This decision was written for Donald Trump and Donald Trump only. And the justices who said that they were writing for the ages, subterfuge. What does the court think that we are? And no one bought it for a second. That the court made Donald Trump president, and now they're enabling what they authorized a year ago.
I think we can do one more question back here.
It's good to see you, Your Honor. I'm going to argue with you that you actually are prophetic, because the last time I saw you in a panel was about a week after the election at the Rule of Law Society, which you should all take a look, check out. And at that conference, there were 3 U.S. Or White House counsel who all couldn't conceive of a non-independent Department of Justice. And you were the one who had clarity to see that that was not going to be the case here. What is it that people are not seeing now that we should see or pay attention to going forward?
Great question. Everyone is seeing everything. It's not possible in the United States of America for any American citizen not to see or to understand what's going on today. Those people who accept it and those people who approve of it, they cannot defend themselves under the Constitution of the United States of America or under the founding principles and values of this nation. The main people, of course, are the Republicans. To the person, well, first off, we've got to analyze this to this extent. There are no more Republicans today like every single one of the Republicans that you and I and everyone in this room and everyone else in America have known for 50 to 75 years. Not one. Why? Because Donald Trump and MAGA have purged all of us from the Republican Party. Now, again, that's not saying much. We all know that. But we need to think about that, because if there's any hope at all, which is hard to see at the moment, it's that Republicans, Donald Trump's not a Republican, MAGA's not a Republican. I first said, I think in the New York Times for the first time, that there is no Republican Party in America today. And it's indisputable. Donald Trump would agree with that. This is the Donald Trump MAGA party. To begin, all of the Republicans, meaning half of the country, need to come to their senses and take back America from Donald Trump and MAGA. And that begins with Capitol Hill and the Republicans there. There are not all of the Republicans in Capitol Hill are MAGA. There's more than enough Republicans, but of course, just like in this Beauvais appointment, and just like in the big beautiful bill or whatever man said, there are plenty of Republican votes. They're either scared, most of them I think are. Well, maybe not most of them that are still left. You know, most of the ones who were scared just left, okay? But all of them, whether they were scared or in full approval, they're voting in lockstep with Donald Trump. And by the way, we, the American people, are reelecting them for doing that. So we don't have any complaint. We begin taking back America at the voting box. Oh, come on, one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate your remarks and your writing. Given what you said, however, I'm not feeling the hope that Daly Express at the beginning. And so my question to you is, I'm really looking to 2026 at the voter box to change things in Congress. And if that should happen, and in some way the Democrats were to take back both houses of Congress, and I realize that's an unlikely proposition, but there's time. If that were to happen, would you have an opinion about the possibility of Congress adopting a law to expand the size of the Supreme Court so that there would be an opportunity to appoint additional members?
Yeah, I do, and of course, this issue has been around, of course.
It has, and I've been opposed to it for a long time, but I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, and all right-minded people have opposed it. Just like every other issue in politics, it depends on whose ox is being gored, right? And I mean that it depends on whose ox is being gored as to whether you'd ever have the votes for it.
Right.
But as to that question, you would never have the votes, so it's not even worth thinking about. But it would be wrong, okay? If we could ever get, a majority of Americans to voice their opinions about all of this, there would be no need for the Supreme Court. I believe this Supreme Court would turn on a dime. I mean, first off, what can they even possibly say? I mean, that they can't defend themselves. Well, they can't defend themselves because they haven't explained themselves. So, and by the way, these things, when it happens at the Supreme Court of the United States, it happens for eternity. The Supreme Court of the United States is not Capitol Hill. Every day is a different day. When the Supreme Court decides the immunity case, when the Supreme Court, for the first year of Donald Trump's administration, refuses to explain one single one of its opinions, that will last for eternity. Now, the silver lining, but it's not much, is this Supreme Court will live in infamy for that in the context of Supreme Court jurisprudence forever, because it's unforgivable.
Our time is almost up, Judge. Any final thoughts?
I just want to hear from these people. Look, by way of confession, I'm pretty down at this point. I was down at the election. And I decided after the election that I would not speak or write ever again. And I was determined on that. And then came March, maybe April, when the president issued these corrupt executive orders against the legal profession and lawyers and the federal judiciary and the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States itself. And people, all of you, and literally millions of others who at this point I love, you're not just my friends. You and millions of others around this country, I love you for what you are and the support you've given me, came to me and said, you have to come back. The reason that I had to stop was because my wife and my family had and have lived in absolute terror for 3 years. Absolute terror every single day. And I told my wife I would stop. In April, my wife came to me and said, with tears in her eyes, she said, you have to go back. You have to go back. No one, not one person, is speaking up against this. And I said, really? You want me to go back? And she said, you have to go back. And the Atlantic called me a few days later, and I said I'd be honored. And that's what we've done for the past 4 months. But on that point, the terror and the fear, in fact, someone just wrote, I think New York Times, a fantastic article, that it may have been titled, America is in Fear. And America is in fear. Not just fear for our country and its future, but literally fear for their lives. Okay? You've read it. You read it every day. Keep reading it. Internalizing it. The people who are being snatched off the streets of America today by masked men and thrown into vans and deported around the world into prisons from which they will never emerge. That's what's going on today in the United States of America. And that's what the President of the United States and his administration and the Congress of the United States are celebrating. Celebrating. Melissa, we were just talking, and you should hear her story, but she said, look, referring to, or one of her relatives, she said, her relative said this, and now she says it, not on my watch. I said to Melissa, thank you for saying that. I said, I love that idea, right now in America. Every one of us should wake up every morning with that kind of determination. Not on my watch.
Thank you, Judge.
Let me, this is a walk-on, I apologize. During this time, past month, I wrote the most important words that I will ever write for my country. I wrote a new Declaration of Independence. And I wrote it and released it on July 4th. For the release and the interviews, I flew to Charlottesville and I went to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, the author of the Declaration of Independence. I released this. Basically, it obviously began with every single word from the Declaration of Independence, and then I brought it forward 250 years, and I created 27 self-evident truths about freedom in America. The same number, 27, of the grievances that the American colonists had against King George III and the British Empire. Please get that. The friend of mine who published it said that I was writing for the ages. I was writing for the ages. And please look at it. And Donald Trump's never mentioned. You don't have to. Every single word you read, you will understand that Donald Trump is doing today every single thing that the British Crown was doing, on the basis of which we conducted the American Revolution so that we could establish our independence and our governance under the Constitution and the rule of law. Now, I promise.
Thank you, Judge Luttig. And make sure to follow staff. Thank you so much.
She said it was on Substack. I didn't even know what Substack was. That's why I had to get my friend to do it. But find it there.
It's great.
Thank you all so much.
For this discussion, we are joined by Matt Gianneschi, John Daly, Eileen Laubacher, and Hital Doshi. They're going to discuss the critical intersection of free expression, democratic institutions, and the challenges posed by authoritarianism. Matt Gianneschi is the 10th president of Colorado Mountain College, with an impressive background in public policy and education. He served as the senior education advisor to Governor Bill Ritter Jr. and was the chief academic officer of the Colorado Department of Higher Education.
Woo! Yeah. We used to work together.
John Daly is a thriller novelist and author of the Sean Coleman series, a political columnist, host of the Daly Express podcast, and co-host of the Reagan Caucus podcast and Bernie Goldberg's No BS Zone podcast. You're busy. Eileen Laubacher is a retired United States Navy two-star admiral with a very distinguished career in intelligence and national security. Her final assignment was as the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for South Asia at the National Security Council. She is currently a candidate for Colorado's Congressional District 4. Hital Doshi is a former U.S. assistant U.S. Attorney for Colorado and later a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division. Hital prosecuted monopolies, cartels, fraudsters, scammers, and corrupt public officials, and she won. She is a candidate for Attorney General of Colorado.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and what an impressive and diverse and robust panel we have. So to kick us off, and you can answer every question. You don't have to answer every question. There's a few of you up here, but from your perspectives, whether higher education, national security, or public policy, what institutions are holding the line right now, and which ones are most vulnerable to authoritarian pressures?
Hi. So not with any bias, but I do feel that the United States military is still holding the line with regard to the pressure that are being put on them. I say that because I think that the military is widely regarded as a good and good people who keep in mind the oath that we have all sworn to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What the judge said earlier made me realize so much more clearly the reason that I'm running for office was that I felt very much by March that in all of my 34 years, 38 since I first raised my hand at 17 to swear that oath, the Constitution had never been under as much threat as it is today. I do believe that all of us who have taken that oath take it extremely seriously and are working hard to continue to uphold the rule of law and the things that we all hold so dear. I am gravely concerned about other institutions and the pressures that we're seeing put on them. Less than a month ago, maybe it was just a couple short weeks ago, we saw the former chief of staff for Lauren Boebert reach out to, I believe it was up to 12 different county clerks, Republican county clerks, trying to get access to voting machines here in Colorado. And all of those brave Republican clerks stood up to that pressure and stopped that from happening. And we should be very grateful for that. However, it is unconscionable that something like that could happen here in America. And those are the kinds of things that I'm so gravely concerned about, because not every institution is steeled in that way. And we have to do all that we can to support them in what is this chaotic and tumultuous time.
Okay, thank you for that. We needed somebody to begin other than higher education. So let me offer comments just on behalf of all of higher education, but represent none other than my institution. And I will say that higher education is under probably the greatest pressure they've ever experienced. And it is on almost every level. I mean, look at everything that's happening, and it's about First Amendment rights. It is about freedom of speech. It's about academic freedom. And whatever one's perspectives might be regarding what should and shouldn't be taught on college campuses, those principles are being tested in a way that we've never seen, at least since maybe the 1920s, when we had these debates over evolution heading to the Supreme Court and whether or not that was permissible for the legislative branch to determine what could be taught on a college campus. And so, without representing any other institution, I'll just say that yes, higher education is under probably the most extreme pressure it has ever felt. We are seeing it across all the institutions. You're seeing the debates that are happening in the courts with mostly the Ivy League institutions. So I'm not one of those. I don't represent one of those. But I will say that it does cascade throughout the system. And so you had mentioned something about or one of your comments about fear in the systems. And I will say that I've worked in higher education much of my career. I was raised by 2 faculty members, if you can believe that. So I was I've been around it my whole life. And I've not seen sort of the paralysis that I see right now, and people not knowing what to do. And these are very bright people who've spent their careers dedicated to a particular discipline, and not that they're not doing their job, they're doing their jobs. But I also think that they are very guarded. They are very nervous about what might come, and so I will say that I have taken on a responsibility as president of my institution to keep everyone calm, and so I have tried to, in ways that I never thought I would have to do this, but to just explain what's happening, and the barrage of, it's almost nonstop. The executive orders that are coming, and yesterday we got a new order that came from the Attorney General's office regarding new interpretations that were actually the old interpretations of the executive orders that are being reinterpreted and sent to us again. And so I'd say that it's exhausting for a lot of the institutions, and you're probably sensing it. And so if you have children in college, or if you have colleagues who work around institutions, you're probably sensing a lot of that. And so, yes, I guess that's the answer. That very certainly it is very much front and center for us.
Thanks, everybody. Just want to say, first of all, I don't like to question Judge Luttig's judgment, but he did say he came here to hear me, and that got me a little scared. I'll be honest, because yes, I'm like, maybe I'm starting to have second thoughts about this guy. But no, we appreciate all that you've done. I will say this, for me, what concerns me most right now is Congress, the federal government. Constitutionally, they are supposed to be the most powerful branch of government, and right now they're the weakest, because you have the Republicans in control, and they'll just do whatever Donald Trump asks of them, and that's not how it's supposed to be. I know one can make the argument that happens with both parties, when the president's in power, but it's tough for me to see. I'm a fiscal conservative. We just had this huge bill pass through, and it's tough for me to see members of Congress. I'll give Chip Roy as an example from Texas, who goes through all of these theatrics every time there's a big spending bill to promise he's going to put his foot down. We have this huge national debt problem. And then when it comes time to vote, President Trump snaps his finger and everybody falls in line and votes for it. And but that was good cap. I guess cap off on what I was going to say anyway. But I'd like to go ahead and pass it down.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome and for the invitation here tonight. It's interesting, Judge Luttig, listening to the preview about the Department of Justice. I come here to offer you the perspective of what it was like before, for the decade plus that I spent at the Department of Justice, and what it's been like since January 10th of this year, when I stepped down from the Department of Justice. I think that it surprises me when I am introduced and it's described that I am running for office, because I will tell you this has never been on my bingo card, and I think Eileen and I have had a conversation about that in both of our shared experiences. But there is a gravity to this moment in terms of seeing the dismantling of democratic institutions like the Department of Justice, who have been instrumental, whether Americans realize it or not, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, in terms of advocating for working people, but also for our democracy and our Constitution. And so when we think about what is resilient and what exists today, I think a lot about the number of career civil servants that I supervised and led in my last role. I started as a career civil servant here in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then ended up a senior appointee for the last administration, where I led over 800 lawyers that were taking on the biggest monopolization and antitrust cases in modern history for the last 3 years. And when I think about those 800 lawyers, or the other lawyers in this office or elsewhere, and the incredibly difficult decisions that they have to make on a day-to-day basis, and I'm talking about people of all different political stripes. I'll tell you, I generally never knew what the politics of my colleagues were when I worked at the Justice Department. But the number of phone calls that I got after January 10th and actually after January 20th in transition, asking me for my advice on how should I formulate what my red lines are? How do I decide what it looks like to be a faithful steward to the Constitution? Because I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to the executive branch, not to a particular president. My fealty is to the Constitution. How do I best be part of the solution in this moment in terms of making decisions on what pleadings to sign, what positions to take to court, what level of candor we bring to the court when the court has hard questions about what it is that the Justice Department is doing and what the executive branch is doing. And I have to tell you that in the beginning, my answer was always institutional expertise and durability of the Justice Department and continuity is critical. That started to change over time because I care so much about the people that occupy those roles. And I have to tell you that the people that have stayed have made really tough choices in terms of staying, regardless of where their politics are, in terms of how they navigate this particular environment. And so I think that that's a real source of resiliency in this particular moment. And my why in many ways is very much like Eileen's in the sense that I didn't know that this chapter of my life would look like doing something I never thought I would do in a way, in a public way that I actually stayed very far away from, particularly given that I did public corruption prosecution for some time. And so I've just not been involved in partisan politics really ever. But I think that the reason that I'm running in this particular moment for this particular office, the Attorney General of Colorado, is that the greatest source of resiliency in this particular moment is actually states. And so attorneys generals across the country are the tip of the spear in terms of advocating in many ways while they're not bipartisan coalition, on bipartisan issues, right, that impact all of us in this room and all of us across America. And so when you are looking for places of hope, really think about investing in state and local and municipal governments because that's where the action is, that's where the fight's coming from, and I think that that's a place that's a real opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to audience questions, so start thinking of those. But before I do that, another question. Are we on? Yes. Any thoughts on how we begin to rebuild public trust across political divides? Obviously, we're in a very divisive time in our history. I feel like we probably always feel like we're in a divisive time in our history, but now really seems to take the cake. So as we're here, it's a room of Republicans, Democrats, independents, moderates, etc. How do you think we work together in order to get to past this time in history?
I'm happy to kick this off briefly to say that I think the single most pressing issue in terms of fighting for our democracy is agreeing on a source of fact, a common set of facts. And so to me, the critical piece of restoring public trust is identifying how we assess the sources of information that we use as a society and as a government to make decisions. And that is, not to be super on brand as an antitrust prosecutor, right? I think that that's an incredibly important reason why ascertaining and fighting back against consolidation and malfeasance in information and fact generating enterprises is absolutely critical.
Thanks for that. As you just said so beautifully, this was never something that I thought I was going to do either, and the way that you described your feelings in January, February, and March are what brought me to this stage. I had just retired from the Navy after 34 years of active and reserve service for our country, and I was looking forward to spending time with my 5 children and my 3 grandchildren and my beloved husband, and I just was pretty despondent about the state of things as they were and all that I saw, the institutions that I held most dear being, ripped apart and the damage that was being done to our country. And I just felt in that moment that I had to try to do something and stand up. And so I think that's what I perceive as what we all have to do. We all have to think to ourselves in this moment, what are we as individuals going to do and how are we going to come together in this moment to make a stand and to make a difference? And I think that your point is excellent. Starting locally is a great way to think about what we need to do, because very few movements start from the top and work their way down, right? They start with the people and work their way up. We all need to be more engaged. We need to be working on becoming more educated. We need to understand more about the genuine issues and what's going to happen. We all need to be willing to stand and put ourselves at risk. Before I did this, I reached out to each of my children individually. I've got beautiful and fantastic children who are all amazing individuals. But I know that by doing this, I'm putting myself at risk and them at risk as well, especially with a last name like Laubacher, for which I blame my husband. So, and as an Eileen Laubacher, you are remarkably findable. Yes, but that's so true, particularly in Colorado. Maybe less so. And yeah. So I think that what we all have to do, though, is find the ways that we can take action and the things that we can do. We need to talk. We need to write. We need to talk to our neighbors. We need to organize. We need to find people that we can support and ideas that we can get behind. And we need to use as our base the Constitution of the United States of America and the rule of law, the basis upon which our entire beautiful country is founded. And we need to believe that most Americans believe the way that we do. And most Americans at heart want good things for each other and for our families and for America. And we have to be ready to fight.
So unlike these two, I actually always thought I'd be a college president at some point. And I worked toward it for a long time. And it happened. You're welcome. So I would be a negligent educator by not saying I think there is hope. And I think there is an opportunity, and I won't. You've already covered the local part, and we do a lot of that. As you may recall, up in the Vail Valley, we do a lot of convening and others. So let me talk about the students today. And I think maybe it might be helpful for you to maybe think about your own role and what you can do to help our students feel more hope. This generation of students was born during the Great Recession. So just kind of wrap your head around what their reality was like. Whatever the big events in your lives were, they were being raised at a time when their parents were losing their jobs, losing their homes. There was no hope. And then we've seen whatever the last 4 or 5 presidential successions as we think about sort of what has their experience been like. They have not been able to see a model of civic engagement that many of us aspire to. And I think for many of us, it is incumbent for us to model that, to show students, to show the next generation that it is possible. They only know partisanship that is, deeply divided encampments, and it is whatever the other party's for, I'm against it, and I'm against them personally. And so I still teach. So one of the few things I put into my contract when I became a president is that I still get to teach. For me, it allows me to stay engaged with the students and just talk to them and hear their stories. And a couple of things I will be hopeful about, and I do want to leave some hope, eternal optimist, I suppose. These students are smart. This generation, they're stuck to their phones. I have 2 at home. They're stuck to their phones. They have unlimited access to information. But they're thoughtful, they're kind, they're smart. They just don't know where to go for the models, to see the behaviors that we should be showing them, and to give them the examples. They can't turn to TV and see it happening on a debate stage. They can't trust, in the quote unquote, they're being told not to trust news sources or others, and so they go find their own information. And so I think there is an opportunity in that the privilege I have in being able to both represent colleges and educators and the students, but also being in the classroom with them. They give me hope every time I see them, and I think some of it is that in their quiet moments, they'll ask you the really poignant questions. But they're afraid in many ways. My observation, I'm not trying to speak for the entire younger generation, I'm certainly well beyond them, but I have observed that the students, they want to have a dialogue. They want to know. They're hungry for the discussion, it's hard to find. And so there's so much of a smokescreen of ideas and issues, and they can't sort out what's right and what's wrong and what's truth and what's, that I think in some ways to just kind of hold their hand and say, okay, let's start with the Federalist Papers. Like, let's start with some of these foundational documents. Help to understand, where did this come from? You know, what was the Enlightenment all about? And try to help ground them in what this all means, so that they can feel connected to it. Because right now I think they feel like they're observers of chaos. And they're not quite sure because they feel powerless in this. They feel like it's being done to them and then not being done for them. And so there's an opportunity there. And let me just leave with one thing that I'll say, that I think there are many institutions who are doing this, at least at my college. One of the things that I'm trying to do is hold a variety of, we're launching a civics education initiative. It's going to start on September 17th, which is Constitution Day, so we're going to launch that. But it's a place where I hope we can begin to get back to the issues and the principles and the ideas of what this country is all about, and talk about those, not talk about partisans, not in our party, and not talk about the things that divide us, but start to help our students and our communities begin to come back to the things that bring us together. So maybe there are opportunities to continue this.
Those are some great answers. The question was about restoring trust. I think you got to start, and this was brought up earlier, by modeling good behavior for others. I think that's important, and a great start on that is just to be honest. I think people are starving for honesty right now. They're being told all kinds of different things. There isn't that commonly accepted set of facts, and that's a big deal. I would say it's also important to put your faith in principles. People are always going to let you down. Principles, not so much. Modeling that you're living by the principles that you talk about, I think, builds you a lot of credibility. And right now we hear, a lot of people who speak out about principles, a lot of our leaders, and then don't really hold true to those. And they use those principles to attack the other side while not exhibiting them themselves. And I think that builds a lot of distrust out there. And I think changing that is a way of turning things around.
Thank you all. Any audience questions?
How do you fix the source of facts? I will have a conversation with a neighbor and I haven't heard of what she's talking about sometimes. How do you get there?
I'll go ahead and start off. It's very difficult to break through, I will admit that. So I write political commentary, I do multiple podcasts. I do everything I can in my commentary, to be fair, go off of what's factual instead of what the reality I would prefer, or the reality I want to scare people with. I don't want to scare people with anything. But I think it's important to be honest. It's very tough because there are so many people, so much of our political discourse these days is driven by the extremes, and they are driven by cable news, the internet. I have friends out on Facebook all day long who can communicate, it seems, exclusively by political memes. They just post up there all day. Half the time they're not true. They're factually incorrect. But it's tough. It's tough to change that, because that is how a lot of people who are politically engaged communicate, and it's not a healthy thing.
Yeah. I thought it was just my job to identify the problem, not the solution. Spoken like a true lawyer, right? Right. No, I find this to be an incredibly vexing problem. And a couple of things that I think would be a move in the right direction. First, I am deeply troubled by the payment made by a news organization in settlement of a certain lawsuit, which I found to be problematic on so many different levels, followed by, here's the antitrust part again, a merger that cleared a few days later. And so I think social and public and political accountability to our news organizations, however they exist in the modern media, to include Substack and whatever else, is incredibly important as educated consumers of facts and people that are invested in trying to get things right. The second thing that I have found has been useful, because to your point about the extremes that we live in as a society, I should share that I've lived and worked in Colorado for the last 13 years. I grew up kind of all over the place because of the lack of stability in my parents' jobs and things like that. I'm a first-generation American. But primarily I grew up in the Deep South in Alabama. And as you might imagine, there weren't a lot of people that necessarily shared my values or my family story in the communities that I grew up in. And yet they are some of my biggest champions, because back in that time period, there was a real sense of an idea around community and what that meant, even if you had different points of view. So the bridge to the idea of what it means to operate from a same set of facts as a starting point is one that I think is about extremes versus the middle. And so often when you are having conversations with people like the one you were describing with your neighbor, where she's describing something you haven't even heard about, right? I think coming from a place of good faith, this is the principles point, right? Which is to say, what does that fact mean to you, right? What is that in service of? And the thing that I really struggle with is when we have competing factual narratives that are basically whataboutisms, right? Like, masked people are taking people off the street in America without due process of law. Well, immigration is in crisis. Wait, hold up. We can hold two things to be true at the same time, right? And so I find that giving credence to the other fact, often in that moment, even if I disagree with the substance or the contours of the fact, allows us to distill into that principles-based discussion. And I think the more that we demand accountability from everywhere that we get news and from our politicians and public officials and whatever else, the more that we'll get to that principles-based conversation.
More questions?
Yeah. Russia. There is a reason why there is no longer a common basis of facts. Okay? That is, there is the Putin regime, its principle of operation is, they have the slogan, nothing is true and everything is possible. This Soviets would try to convince us of various things in their favor. The Putin regime doesn't really try to do that. They try to make it impossible for us to believe anything. Okay? The social media, which is increasingly dominant, more than the CBS and that kind of stuff, is massively infiltrated by Russian bots right now. Massively. If you spend any time on Twitter, you see it all over the place. And they have polluted our political discourse, both with overt arguments and with just disruption. Basically, it's like flashbangs going off all over the political landscape, making it impossible for organized thought. Notice the level of political discourse in this country has been completely discombobulated by this. This is a major. It's a security threat, okay? That is, when the media was three major networks in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and so forth, you could see who was saying what. Now, everything is being said by unknown people, people with pseudonyms, and rumors and lies and gray stuff, and this needs to be addressed. And and I think this had a very large role in the election of Trump. An entire army of trolls was mobilized for the election of Trump, along with, yes, he had Yanukovych as his campaign advisor, black operations, WikiLeaks. But we are under attack right now. Okay, that is, not just the political system, but the public forum that underlies the political system is massively under attack. And what do you think you've done about this? Perhaps I'd like to address this to Eileen, who was in national security.
This is a grave source of concern. Obviously, as an intelligence officer, we have long been concerned about the misinformation and the disinformation and the potential of all of that. And the things that you're saying are absolutely true. It is very hard to find ways through this morass of information unless you're working hard to find reputable sources of information. My children will talk about, my youngest son, Nick, is here. And he's getting ready to go off to college, which is very exciting. But when the kids would bring things to me growing up and, outraged by one thing or another, I would say to them all the time, what would I say, Nick? Check your source. That's correct. I think what we need to try to find is ways for people to check the source before they head into the inflammatory argument, right? You have to look at where did the information come from, and that is really difficult to do. As a member of the intelligence community, we had to do the same thing. Right after the war began with Iraq, we had to review the way that we were going about making intelligence assessments and make clear to the people who read our products where all the sources were of the material that our assessments were based upon. Because if you can't look into those and you can't delve into the depths of it, then how could you possibly believe the information that you're receiving and that the analysis that's being done is fair and unbiased and accurate? So in the same way, it's much harder today, but it's not impossible. It's just that people have become used to the idea that material can be just delivered directly to their phone and they don't have to ask any questions. My beloved father, whom I adore, will frequently, though it has slowed down, send me information that he gets from friends of his, and it can be anything from, the tiger who's become best friends with the puppy dog or whatever. And I say to him, so Dad, I do so love you. I do need you to check your sources on this information before you send it around to me and to everyone else. And it's the same as true today. The problem is that things happen so fast, or seem to happen so fast, that it makes it really difficult to understand what exactly is happening. I think we all felt that way in the beginning of the Trump administration with executive order after executive order, this idea of it all just becoming overwhelming, and that none of us could figure out what we wanted to do about X executive order because already, Y, Z, A1 to A6 had just come out on the same day. But it's about trying to find ways to unpeel that information and find sources that you can determine to be truthful and accurate. That is growing ever more difficult, as you so beautifully alluded to, with regard to the mergers and acquisitions and those kinds of things that we've all seen happening. I used to always say that I would always read the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post because I felt like if you read those two papers, then you could find a good, reasonable amount of truth right in the middle. But now, of course, I don't read the Washington Post anymore. So now it's the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and I'm not that comfortable with the Wall Street Journal. So I just think it's really important for all of us to think about where we're getting our information from and do the work and do the research, and we have to encourage other people to do the same. So that when your neighbors bring up things about where did you get that information, it's, where did you get that information? That's so interesting, I hadn't read that. Where did you get that? And where was that story from? And that is going to continue to be a problem for us.
One more question?
Well, I'd like to address Matt and what you were saying about the model for the college students. Our oldest grandson is just starting his college career. And I agree completely with what you said. What I see in the public sphere is that the model is extortion, personal thrift. I mean, it's just lies. It's just that. You have this larger public domain of just unbelievably awful. And then as your little family around the dining room table, you want this kid who's not going to live there anymore, going out in the world and having some sort of perspective.
Okay. Everybody hear that? Okay.
Restate the question, please.
Okay. Got to restate the question. It was more of a statement. Okay, it's a comment. Comment that the modeling that the students currently see is very poor. It's divisive. It's personal. It's what else? Okay, this is her quote, not mine, because I do represent a public institution. Extortionist is what she said. Okay. So let me. How would I respond to that? Again, I can't speak for all of higher education. I don't want to do that. I will say. Despite what you hear, and I'm not defending some of the mistakes that higher education has made. There have been mistakes, and there will be mistakes. Those things happen in institutions, and yet there is still a commitment to truth in higher education, and they will be exposed to that. So your grandchildren will see that, and it'll come in various disciplines. They'll see it in their chemistry class, like they'll see it modeled in their English class. They'll see it in their, they may see some outlandish behavior and maybe, frankly, some illegal behavior happening on a college campus. And I'm not defending that either. And at the same time, I do feel like I don't know that again, the students will be exposed to it. They'll see better models, I think. I hope. Depends on where they're going. I'm just kidding. If they come to my college. No, I'm just kidding. Let me say this about the students, though, okay? And I know we may have to have him speak up for the students, because I certainly should not represent the younger generation. I can tell you my observations of the younger generation. My observations of the students that I see in class is that they are frankly more intellectually skilled than my generation was. And I know people think that it's been somehow like a deterioration. That's actually not true. I think they're very capable. They're very capable mathematically. They understand science really well. They understand technology in ways that none of us can imagine. Yeah, their writing is, but we work on that, right? So that's why they come into class, is that we try to help them with that. And ChatGPT isn't going to help all the time, but sometimes, right? Okay. So I'd say this in the modeling, and so I think on the one hand they will see it. I think on the other, encouraging them to go find it and to see it and to be around people that can help them sort of see more of it. In my experience, and I'll just give it's a somewhat personal, but we had the same question up in the mountains. So, we're on the western slope. You sort of look at us, admiral, like you look and you admire the mountains, and then you stay here in the Front Range, and then you come visit periodically, and we appreciate that. And so leave some money when you do, and all the local restaurants. But one of the things that we found in our local communities, and just to give you a sense of my district at the time when we first started this had Lower and Bobert on one side and Jonah Goose on the other, and it's sort of that is a pretty typical that's a sort of mountain town. That's kind of how it is. In the communities that we were in, and we decided to have a series of events that we called Rediscovering Common Ground. And what we did is we didn't lecture people about the Constitution. We asked communities to come together and say, what do you value? And talk to your neighbors. What do you value? And are there things we all agree to? And very quickly, it became apparent that, we actually agree on most everything. And what are you most proud of? Like the question I would begin the conversation with, whether I was in Salida or Steamboat Springs or wherever I was, I would start with, what makes you most proud of your community? And they go, the new bridge we just built, or whatever, this new park that we came together. We all came together and we funded the schools, and this is great, and whatever it was. But it was trying to help remind them of the things that they should be proud of and that are enabled by the liberties given to us by our Constitution, and the opportunity to protect those and to try to help them see themselves in it. So I think there are opportunities, and again, I don't know, I can't speak for the generation, I don't want to speak for all the students, but I will say the one thing I did observe that I've tried to work with my students on when they're in my classes is they are nervous about debate because they think debate means yelling at each other. They don't know, see, he's nodding, my students, I would say, we talk about a historical issue of some kind, and students would kind of come on different issues on, they were right to do this, they were wrong to do that, okay. So I would start small, say like, talk to your neighbor about what you see, and then we kind of grow it a little bit. We'll talk to a larger group, and okay, where are we in agreement? And we try to model where they have the opportunity to feel more confident doing it. But I will tell you, if you just open it up to a large group like this, most students will sit and stare at you like this. Because they have been told that debate means yelling at somebody and disagreeing to the point where you no longer see them as human. And that's how they see it. And so I think that the chance to sort of humanize ideas and to talk to each other and to see it, and I'm still very hopeful that that is going to be true at every college campus they experience. Yes, there's going to be some stuff that has to be cleaned up certain places. And at the same time, I hope that maybe that gives you some perspective on what you might observe, and sort of how I see it in the classroom is teaching them the skills on what debate really is and what it's not, and how to talk about issues and not people. And those kinds of principles, I think, are the things that give me hope that they will get there, but we do need to teach it.
Thank you so much. And as we close, any rapid fire final thoughts?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Principles First is an organization I had some interest in starting a couple of years ago. I went to the last two DC summits and met with a lot of patriotic people who want the best for this nation, who are very concerned. And it's always encouraging to meet with such people who recognize some problems and are kind of looking for answers. It's sometimes hard to provide answers in this political environment, but I think this is a good first step. Talking to each other and talking about just common interests.
You just heard from me, so I will be brief and just say thank you for engaging on these kinds of issues and participating and trying to help us heal America and move forward.
Similarly, I just want to say thank you, and I do believe strongly in this younger generation, and I always say that I'm just trying to do my little bit of part to leave it off a little bit better for them, raise the bar a little bit before I turn it over to their capable hands.
Yeah, the kids are definitely all right, even if we're not. I think that gratitude for the opportunity to be here and to meet all of you. I think that the thing I'd like to leave this conversation with, which has been really illuminating for me as well and building up hope in terms of what I'm doing and the conversations I'm having, is to say, as Judge Luttig said, not on our watch, right? Not on my watch. And to me, what that means, and what I have thought for the time that I got to say Hedl Doshi for the United States every single time I went to court, is this idea that there are heroes among us, that there are ways to be heroic in small ways, big ways. And so I just think that it's really important in this particular moment in history to understand the unique roles and the complementary roles that we all play in terms of making sure that we don't lose our democracy on our watch.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Of course, Judge Luttig, Governor Polis, and thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here. If this is your first time with Principles First, I hope it's not your last. And to our over 9.4 thousand friends on Twitter, 10,000 friends on Twitter who are watching on the live, Principles First, anything but extremism. We're about normalcy and putting civility back in civic discourse. So civil discourse, I should say. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Follow us on social media and have a good evening.